My name is Key Williams. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I use he and they pronouns. My activism is basically right now the Black Lives Matter movement, along with climate change and some abolitionist work.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've experienced the connections between the COVID-19 Black Lives Matter uprising and the climate crisis?
Unfortunately, like we see the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor not slowing down during a pandemic. And it kind of just feels like there's always this ongoing need for Black Lives Matter to step up, speak up, and sometimes spark up to kind of have some voices be heard and some justice be brought, whatever that looks like. And so New York City had mutual aids that was supporting Minneapolis. And then when it comes to climate work and how that overlaps, I kind of felt like it was all hands on deck within that moment. And that was really powerful to have people from all different issues, be that labor or climate or unions or whatever that be, to really come out and say, like, for these, 3 weeks, nearly a month of uprisings and protests, like continuous protests, that we're all going to come together. If I was to talk a little bit about my perspective as an organizer and an activist here, it was rough work. I think it was really hard, and sometimes we don't think about the nuances and the intersections that organizers, Black organizers, and queer organizers have to hold in the midst of all that's happening in the world. And so there were some very beautiful moments to it and some really powerful moments to it. And then, as we saw with a lot of the news reports, that people aren't getting sick from the protests. And so I'm really thinking about how powerful that is in terms of care and taking care of one another. And really people practicing their politics during this time. That's been really powerful to see.
You mentioned some beautiful and powerful moments. Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the best and biggest examples for me would be the Stonewall action that happened, that really just centered and took the leadership of Black trans people, and really just geared that up. I can also think of the Brooklyn Liberation March that happened. That was from Brooklyn Museum, where the number is like 15,000 people showed up in a sense of solidarity with Black trans lives. There was a moment, you actually can see it on Twitter, where they had a huge projector TV screen in front of City Hall so that they can watch the budget hearing live, right? So that they can actually see the votes going in. And I think that for me was just like, okay, democracy is alive a little bit, right?
How has the pandemic impacted you personally and your family?
My mom lost her job. She lost both of her jobs. And there was that, what we see this conversation around, like laying people off or keeping them on in regards to like unemployment and healthcare, and just like how tangled that system really was, but how personal that system was for me, right? To like actually be dealing with this kind of like, okay, my mom's losing their job. They have, I have two younger siblings who are still in grade school, right? So in the midst of this, they're trying to transition to the digital world where we didn't have a computer, an actual computer at my mom's house. Everybody's like tablet and smartphones. So my mom was like, we don't need a computer, right? But now we went in and kind of did like a community resource actually to purchase two laptops for my younger siblings, so that they could have access to that. Like my mom and my siblings living upstate, there's still some distance between that. And even just, like the trying to figure out bills and resources and all of that. But to have my partner be sick and to really be stuck in the house with them and unable to do anything, I think that was one of the most stressful moments, and just like staying up all night to make sure that they're breathing. Like what is, to actually live in that type of reality was very, very hard. But I also, with them being well and doing fine now, and my mom returning to work, and my siblings are introverts, and they do not like going outside anyway. So for them, they're having the best life. But I think for me, it just brought up a lot of things, and it really showed the instabilities and how quickly everything can destabilize. We are really much focusing on what recovery looks like. We're working on this conversation here in the citywide climate movement to really have a conversation around race and climate, really collectively, intentionally, with leadership from Black organizers and Indigenous organizers and youth that have really, taken the lead in the city. Lastly, I'll talk about a little bit, the Black trans community in terms of even building trust and integrity and having the ability to have deeper conversations in the midst of a global pandemic, when we have kind of this like death cloud hanging around us, literally, and all of these other issues we're having politically in the landscape, like to be able to still see an expansion of camaraderie, to see people jumping into organizing spaces. I've had a lot of conversations with people who kind of were just like, we need to do something today, and there's a lot of people who have been like, we need to do something forever. There was just so many fights that people were having to battle at the same time, right? And so it's like, to have Black Lives Matter, have uprisings in the midst of a pandemic, meant that Black people were so angry and upset and felt so mistreated that there was mass risk of life nationally, and also many other communities and allies. There's a mass risking of people feeling like they have to be out in the streets because they're not being heard. It doesn't match what we're being presented with on television, or the narratives that is coming out of our government and our elected officials. And at the same time, there's still so much hope because people are going out in the streets, right, and keeping each other safe and holding each other accountable and holding elected officials accountable, and still making those political demands that, we have as much investment in the communities, and divesting from police, that we really pay attention to climate change and what's happening here with COVID, and heating centers and cooling centers and compost and all these different conversations that are really important. And I think that people are really getting a sense of, what we need to actually function and thrive and build and grow and sustain ourselves as community, and also some of the things we can get rid of. I think that part of the hope is really seeing the power in this moment, that people are willing to step in, take initiative, step up, have hard conversations, but also work together.
Thank you so much, Key, for your time and your energy and these wonderful thoughts.
Thank you, Marilyn. It's been great.